We have objectives. Those objectives are clear. We can hold anything at issue. Anything. The United States military controls the...
Good evening, and this is no longer a limited exchange. More than 7,000 targets have already been struck across Iran and its military infrastructure. And now officials are signaling the biggest strike package yet. That matters because this is not a warning shot phase anymore. This is the point where sustained pressure turns into visible military degradation, where one side says its own capacity is growing by the day, while the other side's ability to respond is being worn down in real time. And the most revealing part is not the headline. It is the machinery underneath it. At an American base in the United Arab Emirates, the AH-64 Apache attack helicopters are being turned around without pause. Refuel. Reram. Relaunch. Then do it again. Ground crews are working around the clock because the Strait of Hormuz is now a live interception zone, and these helicopters are being sent into it to stop Iranian Shahed drones before they reach U.S. bases, Allied positions, or oil tankers moving through one of the most sensitive waterways on Earth. That is the real pressure point here. Because when drones start hunting bases and commercial shipping in Hormuz, this stops being a contained military contest. Now, you are talking about global energy routes, naval security, alliance credibility, and the risk that one successful strike could ignite something far larger than either side publicly admits. And the operating rhythm tells you just how serious the situation has become. Some Apaches lift off from land and head straight into patrol zones over the strait. Others fly out to naval vessels in the Gulf, land on the flight decks, and sit on standby like loaded traps. The rotation never really stops. Helicopters going out, helicopters returning, others waiting on ships for the next alert. It is a conveyor belt of interception, built on the assumption that more incoming threats are not a question of if, but when. That alone should get your attention, because a military does not maintain that kind of tempo unless it expects repeated contact. And once that becomes the normal pattern, the strategic picture changes. You are not dealing with a symbolic deployment anymore. You are looking at a sustained air defense hunt over open water against drones that are trying to slip through toward military and economic targets. The kill chain is brutally efficient. Radar operators inside the Combat Information Center detect the contacts first. They classify them as hostile. They pass the coordinates to Apache crews either already airborne or waiting on deck. Then the order goes out and the response window shrinks to minutes. Pilots on the deck start engines and lift off almost immediately. Pilots already in the air turn directly into the threat. Then comes the intercept. The Apaches close the distance, acquire the drones, and fire before those drones can get where they were sent to go. After the engagement, some helicopters land back on the ships to reload and refuel. Others return to the base in the UAE for a full turnaround. And that turnaround is not cosmetic. It is a full combat reset. Hydra 70 rocket pods are reloaded. 19 rockets per pod, up to 4 pods on a helicopter, 76 rockets total. The 30mm chain gun under the nose is refilled with high explosive ammunition used to tear drones apart at close range. Then the Hellfire missiles go back on the rails, laser-guided weapons built for armored vehicles, bunkers, and larger hardened targets. So look at the contradiction. Officials are describing a campaign of precision, but precision here does not mean light. It means relentless. It means a system built to find, classify, launch, kill, reload, and launch again. And that is what makes this more dangerous than the slogans. Because every time one of these helicopters comes back empty, mechanics and armorers are already waiting to turn it into a weapon again. Every time the radar lights up, another crew moves. Every time another drone appears, the distance between detection and destruction gets shorter. That is how wars widen without a formal announcement. Not with one speech, with cycles, with tempo, with one side proving it can keep absorbing the strain while the other keeps losing assets in the sky. And the deeper question is no longer whether these interceptions are happening. It is how long this pace can continue before something larger breaks. What makes this even more serious is that the system is already being built for attrition, not a quick burst, not a symbolic show of force. Attrition. Because nearby, at a desert airstrip, an American C-17 is landing with another AH-64 Apache inside it, delivered as a replacement to keep patrol coverage over the Strait of Hormuz from dropping for even a moment. That one detail changes the entire reading of this crisis. You do not fly in replacement gunships unless you are planning for sustained operations, equipment wear, combat losses, or all three. That is the deeper layer. This is no longer just about shooting down drones one by one. This is about preserving an air intercept machine under pressure, making sure the line does not break, and proving that even if aircraft are damaged, exhausted, or pulled for maintenance, another one will be shoved into the fight fast enough to keep the pattern intact. And that replacement process is not clean or easy. The helicopter comes in partially disassembled inside the cargo aircraft. Rotor blades removed, tail rotor removed, stub wings detached, weapons pylons separated, fairings packed away, crates of rockets and Hellfires offloaded beside it. Then the airframe itself is pulled out carefully, rolled down the ramp by hand, and moved across the strip by tow vehicle like a giant, unfinished weapon being dragged into an emergency operating room. That image matters, because it shows how war really works once the cameras move past the launch footage. The fight is not only in the air. It is in the wrench turns, the connector checks, the hydraulic tests, the crews sweating over a machine that has to go from cargo to combat in the desert, with no margin for error. Every weak point has to be closed. Mechanics bolt the rotor blades back on. The tail rotor is mounted. The drive shaft is connected. The stub wings go back into place. Weapons pylons are installed. Avionics panels are reconnected and tested. Rocket pods are loaded. Hellfire missiles are mounted on the rails. The chain gun drum is filled. Then comes the full checklist: hydraulics, electrical systems, flight controls, engines, weapons, weapon culls. That is not theater. That is continuity of war. And continuity is exactly what makes this so dangerous. Because the public sees an interception. What the military sees is an operational loop that must survive day after day. Detect, launch, kill, recover, rerum, repair, replace, repeat. Once a military reaches that stage, it is no longer reacting to a surprise. It is adapting to a campaign it expects to continue. Now, put that next to the claim of over 7,000 targets struck across Iran and its military infrastructure. That number is staggering on its face. But paired with this level of sustainment, it points to something even more important. The strikes are not being treated as isolated successes. They are being folded into a larger structure of persistent force, where the question is not whether pressure can be applied, but how fast it can be scaled without exhausting the system underneath it. And that is where the risk starts spreading outward, because the Strait of Hormuz is not some distant patch of water with no consequence. It is one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. If Iranian drones are coming through in waves toward ships, bases, or tankers, and American helicopters are sitting armed on decks waiting for radar calls, then the margin for miscalculation is razor thin. One missed drone, one wrong identification, one successful hit on a tanker or a warship, one Apache lost in the intercept. That is all it takes to turn a winding operation into a reach, and the pattern keeps tightening. A combat alarm sounds on a ship in the strait. Radar picks up another wave of Iranian drones heading toward the formation. An Apache already on deck spins up, lifts fast, turns into the threat, acquires targets on its sensors, and opens fire. The drones go down. The pilot confirms the kills. The report goes back to the ship. The command center logs another interception. Then the helicopter circles back to the ship. The command center logs another interception. Then enemy shoot the head. That last part is the one people should not miss. It waits for the next alert, which means everyone involved expects another one. And if both sides are now operating on that assumption, then the real question is no longer how intense this has become. It is what happens the first time this machine fails to stop what is coming. So now the real danger comes into view. Not the clean version, not the official version, the real one. Because once a war machine starts running on this kind of loop, the battlefield is no longer just where the missiles land. It is inside the tempo, inside the assumption that another wave is already coming, inside the decision to fly replacement Apaches into the theater, rebuild them in the desert, push them onto patrol, and keep the Strait of Hormuz covered as if interruption itself would be a strategic failure. That tells you everything. It tells you the threat is not being treated as occasional. It tells you commanders believe this is durable. It tells you the skies over that waterway are now contested enough that downtime is a liability. And when the world's most sensitive oil choke point starts operating under that kind of pressure, nobody gets to pretend this is a distant exchange with limited consequences. Because Hormuz is not just another map label. It is one of the arteries of the global economy. Tankers move through it. Energy prices react to it. Insurance markets react to it. Shipping routes react to it. Governments react to it. So when Iranian drones are heading toward ships, bases, and commercial traffic, and American helicopters are launching from decks within minutes to shoot them out of the sky, that is not a local tactical problem. That is a strategic stress fracture with global reach. And here's the part people usually miss. A campaign can look controlled right up until the moment it isn't. That is how escalation works in the real world. It hides inside repetition. One interception works, then another, then another. Crews get faster. Command centers get sharper. Everyone starts to believe the system is holding. Then one drone gets through. One radar picture gets crowded. One pilot sees the threat too late. One ship takes a hit. One tanker burns in open water. One aircraft does not come back. And suddenly the language changes from contained. That is not exaggeration. That is the math of exposure. And the exposure is widening. More than 7,000 targets have already been struck across Iran and its military infrastructure. That is not a small statistic buried in a briefing. That is a declaration that the pressure has already moved beyond signaling and into sustained punishment. Pair that with the constant Apache rotations, the shipboard standby posture, the rapid rearm cycles, the replacement aircraft flown in by C-17, and the picture gets much darker. This is not force being displayed. This is for the force. There is a difference. Displayed force is political theater. Maintained force means leadership expects the crisis to keep demanding resources tomorrow, next week, and after the next headline has faded. And once both sides start acting like the next clash is inevitable, the room for de-escalation gets smaller than the public understands. That remains an open question, and it is the one that matters most. Can this pressure keep mounting without triggering the one event that neither side can politically absorb? Because that is where the whole structure becomes unstable. If Iran keeps pushing drones into the fight, it risks inviting heavier retaliation and deeper damage to its military network. If the United States keeps expanding the scale and tempo of strikes while treating the Strait as an active kill zone, it risks normalizing a level of conflict that can spiral from interception to direct regional confrontation with almost no warning. And once that threshold is crossed, the consequences do not stay military for long. They hit oil. They hit shipping. They hit markets. They hit diplomacy. They hit civilians. They hit every government that suddenly has to answer whether this is still a managed campaign or the front edge of something much bigger and much harder to stop. So now the question is simple, and it is serious. Are we watching a campaign that is breaking Iran's operational reach? Or are we watching the construction of a battlefield so tense, so busy, and so unforgiving that one failure, one misread, or one successful strike detonates the next phase? Leave your view in the comments. Keep it grounded. Keep it serious. Watch the next development closely because this story is moving through action, not rhetoric. And subscribe because the next shift in this crisis may not arrive with much warning at all.